First, I got to do a couple of shout-outs. Yes, we'll do more at 10, but there's a couple of real special ones we have to do, and one is that Will Perry, I think you know him, has tuned in on Facebook Live. So,
yeah, youngest son.
and we are so glad Will is joining us. Will has been such a big supporter and helping us with publicity for the show every week, so we're so pleased. Rob Hackler is tuning in on Facebook Live. Another WATD personality, right?
Well, we have a lot of them.
I know. You have some very fine people over at WATD. Now, you've told us a little bit about some of the stories from when you were young, and some of those are incorporated into the next song that Keith's going to do in just a few minutes. But I'd love to have you tell people the story about WATD and how you named the station WATD.
Well, we built WATD. It was something that nobody thought could be done because there were no frequencies, no FM frequencies left in the Boston market. They were snapped up a long time before I even got out of college. Actually, there was one left when I left college, and it was too late to get that. So we had lots of problems when I was a kid, just out of college. I went and I studied electronics. I was an English major, but I did a lot of studying about electronics and things, and I got a first-class FCC radio license so that I ended up getting hired by stations as just part-time to do stuff for them, to do engineering work. And I finally realized that I knew enough about stuff to do, if I could, the company I worked for full-time made communications equipment for the Navy. And so I was the guy who would go out to the various naval schools at the naval bases and teach the sailors how to fix the equipment on the ships when they needed to. So I said to myself, gee, you know, if I can do that with the government agency, maybe I could do that with the FCC. And so I sort of taught myself how to do a radio application and find a frequency, and I started doing that. And I did a number of applications for people, and I'd never take any money for it. I would just take stock in the company if they got it. And ultimately, my parents, who were both teachers, and they didn't have any money to send me out, they had to sell a piece of land on their farm to put me into college. But I managed to get little pieces of radio stations, which I ultimately was able to turn into a little cash myself. And then I filed for a radio station to put a channel into Falmouth, Massachusetts, which is WCIB. I put that on the air in 1970, in September of 1970. It's still on the air, down there at 50,000 watts. And I sold my interest in it back in 1973. Got married and moved up, bought a house up in Duxbury, and started working on trying to get a radio station for the South Shore. And it took quite some time because we had to take a frequency that was on Martha's Vineyard and was unbuilt. It was the only frequency that would fit up in this neck of the woods. And so we managed to move that frequency, much to the chagrin of the people on Martha's Vineyard who had to take a different frequency, and we moved that up to Marshfield. And it took 5 years after we moved it up to actually get the radio station on the air, or 5 years.
Sure. Well, there's so many obstacles you had to overcome.
And even then, when we tried to build the thing, we tried to, you had to put up a radio tower.
Sure.
And you had to go to the zoning board in Marshfield to get a permit to put that up.
And that was yet another obstacle.
And when we tried, that was another obstacle because nobody wanted a radio tower.
Everybody wants the radio, but they don't want the radio tower.
But they don't want the radio tower.
Exactly.
So we tried a couple of sites, and there was a lot of political pressure to keep that radio tower off. One time, the town actually bought the land. The conservation people bought the land to keep it conserved rather than broadcasting. And finally, a lady called us and said, I got I got 6 acres of land that you might like to use for your tower, and I'd be happy to sell it to you. and if you want it. And I said, well, we have to get a permit for it. And she said, fine, I'll give you an agreement.
And this was the land out by the dump.
Yeah, it was out near the right beside the town landfill.
Sure.
So we hired a lawyer who's still in business, Paul Kaufman, and Paul and a bunch of us, 3 or 4 of us, went to the zoning board meeting. And by that time, the zoning board people were kind of tired of seeing us, and nobody. I mean, it was right next to the landfill. There was nobody living beside it. And so they finally said, okay, we give you a permit for the tower. Well, we were so happy about that we went down to what was then the combination bowling alley and Chinese restaurant down on Ocean Street in Marshfield. And we had maybe 1 or 2 drinks too many. And we were talking about, what are we going to do with this station now? What are we going to call it? And somebody said, we tried different different names. Then somebody said, after probably their 3rd drink, well, let's call it WATD. And I said, well, what's WATD stand for? He says, the only place in town they let's build a tower. We're at the dump. And we all thought that was great. And so I got my lawyer to go back to his office, and we typed out a request for the call letters, and then I took it down to the post office and mailed it. And by the time we sobered up, we were WATD.
Good for you.
Good
for you.
But we've had fun with it. We've had lots of fun with it, and we made a lot of difference.
I love it.
Not me, but the people who work there. I mean, we have a most wonderful staff. We have people who truly care. I mean, Tim, who is running the equipment to get us on the air from Plymouth here, Tim's been with us. How many years, Tim? About 12, 13 years?
About 20.
About 20 years.
You know what? Speaking of Tim, you could help take us into the next song, and we will continue with this story. Believe me. We're not letting you go. Tim, could you tell us about the trap door that's in the studio and what is the source of that song? Because that's in Keith's song, but we don't really know what it means.
Yeah, well, the trap door is it's right behind me, actually. Ed has the button, I believe, in your office. Is that correct?
Well, I have many buttons in my office.
One of the buttons is for the trap door, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And also going to the what the source of the song is. I remember one day I was riding around with him in the Charlie, the old RAV4 he had, and he's listening to the station. And he used to have this really cool 2-way radio system that you could talk like to another police officer if he did, but it had a keypad on the microphone. And he could dial up any extension he wanted in the building. So I'm riding one day, Liz is on the air, and he dials up 347, 346, whatever it is here in the studio. And she answers, and he says, Elizabeth, what is the source of that song? And she tells him it's playing off the computer or CD, whatever. She rattles off the chart position, the year it came out, etc. And well, all right, we'll fade it out and just go to the next song. He didn't do this all the time, but if something he really didn't like, it would be out, removed from the playlist.
There goes that trap door, huh?
Yep.
All right.